Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also reach out to us on thebittertruth.info, where you can get some fabulous swag to make your life better, catch past episodes, and read blogs and stuff like that. My guest today, friend of the show, been on before, Professor Bruce Lerro. He's the author of Social Change and Lucifer's Labyrinth, and he joins us today. How you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing great. Great to be here. Great subject to talk about.
Hey, I'm glad you reached out. You recently wrote an article, and it was very detailed and in depth, and we were talking about cults and that kind of thing. So why don't we just jump right on into it? We were it's a big subject, and I want to get into all the stuff. But why don't we just kind of jump right into like the beginnings and how people get indoctrinated?
Okay. So I would say there's two things to say about the timing of this. Historically, cults usually grow in times of economic or ecological or political crisis of some sort. And it's because if they're spiritual cults, it's because the existing religious organizations are implicated in the collapse of the society, or the collapse of civilization. And so people are looking for another kind of spiritual movement to replace the religion. So I got interested in this because I noticed a lot of the cults arising between the 1970s and the 1990s. And that really corresponds to the decline of the United States in terms of its ability economically to support middle-class, working-class people. The second thing that has to do with time is that the timing that cults utilize in an individual's life is usually between the ages of 17 and probably maybe 25, 26 years old. Because people are then at various crossroads. If they're coming out of high school, there's a window of time where they're leaving maybe the structure of their family, but they're not sure what they're going to do. And what a cult does is that provides another option. And then the second thing is when people graduate from college, they're also sort of up in the air. They have to look for work, and there's less likely they have a lot of structure. So the cults are especially interested in people that are in some sort of developmental transition, right? So,
Well, I mean, and then and to that point, I mean, it's just sort of it seems like I've done a little research on this. I mean, over the years, just the Nike guys or whatever, Jim Jones happened when I was in high school. It just seems like they're like, at first it starts off kind of normal, based in, not normal, but based on what you already kind of know, like personal development or Jesus or, some form of, Yahweh or Rasta something, or it's always some deal that you kind of know what it is. And then it becomes more insidious as the leadership gets more entrenched. They start feeling like they have more entitlements. And that just seems to be where all the weird crap comes, right? I mean, but let me ask you, you made a point a second ago, but let me ask you, but you don't necessarily need an economic upheaval for a cult to take root, right? I mean, these things happen when the economy is good as well, right? A lot of these people
Yeah, but it's usually smaller. It's kind of like if you think of them as a band, in good times, in prosperous times, the religions will dominate the band, and then there'll be like a tiny little sliver that might be involved with cults. But then when it gets more crisis-oriented or the economy gets worse, you'll see a greater interest in cults than you would in times of prosperity. But it's not like they don't exist ever. It's just a matter of how prevalent they are.
Did they become more prevalent from the 70s on? I mean, there's always been versions of cults throughout the centuries, but did they become like more of a thing in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I think it's more in the 70s because in the 60s, I think people were, at least my generation living through it, people were more interested in politics, and they had more, the counterculture was more kind of a do-it-yourself spirituality, right? But then if you think about the times, as the times get worse, some of the people, like working class people, don't go for these cults. I mean, they just gravitate to fundamentalist religion.
Right.
But the middle classes and the upper middle classes get a feeling like something's wrong. I mean, the economy is getting a little bit worse. And I don't think that much of my religious institutions. And so what else is around? You know, what else can get, capture my needs and my interest? And I think one of the things they do is, if you look at people between like 17 and 27 or so, they've grown up with various forms of being socialized, their family, their friends, the church, all these groups. And they develop critical thinking by having to compare the socialization forms of other groups to each other. But I think what happens is if you look at, people that are 17, 18, 19 years old are very smart people. I mean, that's an age where cognitively they've really developed. Mm-hmm. And they challenge more of the religion and their families and everything else. And they also feel like, that they don't feel really fully understood because they're caught between being an adult, a teenager, and being an adult. And the forms of socialization that they once felt were really pretty good, they start to question because of their age. And what happens is once they get involved with a cult, one of the very first things a cult does when they're just, they're courting the individual, one of the things they do is they do something called love bombing. Mm-hmm. Right? And love bombing is where you surround the new member with usually people that are very smart psychologically. They're they have good social psychological skills. They surround you with these people, and these people seem to do for you what your family and your friends only can do superficially, and that is they give you a lot of attention. They tell you you're very smart. You're very smart to be here. You're going to get friends here. You don't have to work to build friends because your whole community is here right at the beginning. And so the way people get in is they get seduced. And I think that's what you were saying earlier about the people are giddy because they feel like they found this ideal community, and it's what they've always been waiting for. And the love bombing is what really pulls them in. There's other things, but that's one of them.
Well, and then to your point too, they're not, I'm just finishing up this HBO thing, The Vow, which was this Keith Rainier guy, and I remember the company because in the early 2000s there was this network marketing company that was a personal development Tony Robbins-ish kind of a company,
right?
And I had no idea that it evolved into this like real sinister, dark deal. And you're watching this, you're kind of going, wow, how did you start off? Yes. The guy had a background, but at least this thing started off pretty good or whatever with intentions, and then it just became this really evil, like thing. And these people are not, and any cults that I've kind of looked into, they're not like quote unquote losers. They're usually pretty accomplished. They're attractive. Some come from money, some don't, yes. but they had a career of some kind or a decent gig. And they weren't starving to death. They weren't homeless. Yeah. It wasn't like they got taken in, without shelter. It's just they like you said, the love bombing, whatever they were lacking, people were just really good at zooming in. So like, what are some of the other characteristics of a cult that kind of make it a cult? I mean, because the joke I used to make is Amway's a cult, right? But they're kind of not really, because they don't like have your property or take your stuff, or what I mean. You get stuck with a garage full of soap. But that's kind of the beginning and the end of it, right? So, like, what are some of the characteristics of a cult?
Well, one of the things, other than what I was just saying about the timing of it, one of the things is that the leader has to be charismatic. The leader has to be usually attractive, articulate, and they're in terms of what social psychologists say about their characteristics. They're con artists. They are very good at sizing people up and pulling them in. But another major thing, and this goes deeply into why people stay in a cult, is that you have to create circumstances of dependency. And as long as, like, say, if you first join a cult and you're 23 years old and you're going to school and you have a job and you have your own friends, that cult, and you say you start to go, let's say how this stuff typically happens is, you're in a college town and you see a flyer, and the flyer is designed to ask you questions that are very vague, but they're really questions that all people have conflicts about. Like, they'll ask you questions about, do you miss your friends? I mean, they're pitching this to college students. Do you miss your friends from home? Do you miss your girlfriend? Are you unhappy with work? Are you really disgusted by the way the world is, but you feel like you have no hope of changing it? So those kind of questions are questions that many, 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 many people feel. But the people that are the most desperate there will say, of course, I feel all these things. Let me find out more about this group that they're inviting me to. So in the early stages, what it looks like is, let's say it's a spiritual cult and they have a talk. Let's say they have a talk every Sunday night, once a week. And the way they will pitch it to the person is, would you like to hear an inspiring talk by a professional about how the world can be changed, meet new people, and have pizza afterwards? Okay? Those type of things seem really pretty cool, So like, well, why wouldn't I go to something like this? The problem is, let's say a person goes into the cult and then they don't go to the cult. They just go to these meetings. And let's say they go to these meetings and they start and they go every other week. And they kind of like what they see. But then their friends and their family start to ask them, hey, where have you been? We usually do this on Sunday night. You're not here. Then the person has to sort of account for their absence. And they usually don't know how to explain what the group is. And so the individual begins to feel a conflict between what their existing form of socialization are and their growing interest in this spiritual organization. So there's like a conflict between the worlds.
Right.
So the problem for the cult is that as long as people have competing social networks, they are limited in how dependent the person is. In other words, you have to get people dependent before you can start to ask them to do some of the crazy things that the cults eventually ask them to do.
Right.
So the initial part is they do the love bombing, and that's kind of the first stage. And then they kind of make a prophecy about, like, the way they'll talk about their family and their friends. The cult will first say, well, your family means well, but they don't really understand you. They don't understand you as well as we do. Your friends seem a little lost. They don't know what they're doing either. So there's an initial criticism by the cult of the person's existing framework. Okay. Then as the person comes around more often, and say they start to come every week, then at some point the leader of the cult starts to say, those of you who've been here for a while, we'd like you to realize that your family and friends really don't really understand you. And then they'll start to push further and they'll say, we predict that if you tell your family and friends and your religious organizations about us, they won't like it. And they'll try to bring you back to the dead world, right? Or the world of muggles.
Right.
So we're going to predict that. And then, of course, when the person does get more involved in the cult, the existing social organizations do ask more questions. And so they've got like a ready-made answer. So the idea of what the cult is trying to do is to create a separation between the member and the other existing organizations so that as much as possible, the cult is the only game in town. Once you have that, then you can start to slowly make more and more demands on the members, and the members will be more likely to go along with it because they start to have no place else to go.
Right. And that's Scientology. I mean, I'm from LA, and we had this, it's all over LA, but we have the big center was on the corner of Franklin and Vermont, this big giant blue house. And there was this coffee house across the street called the Bourgeois Pig. And it was open till like 2 a.m, like a bar, but it was just coffee. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we'd wrap up gigs and stuff and go sit there. And, it was an easy place to go, kind of central if you're in LA County. Mm-hmm. But then you see the big Scientology house and you're sort of going, it just looked creepy and spooky. But then like I had some friends that had some experiences there. Mm-hmm. And this one good girlfriend of mine, 30 years ago now, not my girlfriend, but a friend of mine. And she had worked as a waitress in the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. And they were always trying to rope her into the classes. I mean, she had just come down. She had just come down from up north, and she was just, trying to make it as an actress and kind of thing. And, just wanted to work there, make her tips and split, right? She didn't want to take classes or whatever. Yeah. And about once every few weeks, 6 weeks, because they had this dorm thing in the back, because the people that would get suckered into that, their entire paycheck would get sucked up into paying for these classes.
Yes.
So where you're an OT 1 or 2 or 10, now it's up to 10 because Miscavige is just a deceitful prick. But all of that to say that every few weeks, someone would steal a van or steal a car and crash through the gates and escape because they had no options. They had no car. They had, they couldn't like walk because they'd get busted by the guys in the blue jackets.
Yeah.
And she lasted there about 6 months and then she quit working there. But, it's just that kind of thing where they just rope you in. And the other thing I was going to say or ask you, it just seems like in my observations, as the cult itself gets more sinister and gets worse, it's on the inside, it seems like their recruiting practice stays the same. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think another thing to just touch on is that the members of the cult are treated differently. I mean, the cult has a class structure just like society does, right? Sure, and you have the leader, and then you have what I would call the lieutenants, or the people that are really take orders from the leader, but then organize the rank and file according to what the leaders want. So the people that are selected to be kind of the lieutenants, they have a much better time of it in the cults because the leader will treat them differently than they will the rank and file, because they're more dependent on those people to carry out orders. So somebody who is, like say a famous movie star who's in Scientology or something like that, they have a very different experience than a rank and file person who comes in and let's say is, a grammar school teacher or something like that,
right.
A middle class position. Well, the people at the bottom will be expected to do much more. They'll be expected to work much harder, sell newspapers, try to fund the organization, work these long hours. But the people that are the lieutenants have a much better life. So for them, it's not the same thing to be in a cult, right?
Right.
And of course, the other thing is, nobody knows that they're in a cult. The cult denies its existence. Like you don't see signs saying, "Yo, want to join a cult?" It's only once you're in, and usually what happens is other people will say to you, "That sounds like a cult," and you will probably say, It's not a cult, but usually it's people from the outside that you still have connection with.
Sure. And they see you changing also. They see your behavior changing and your language. And it's like, that's another, to me, a sign of cult is, like people give Tony Robbins a hard time. And I'm like, yeah, but I've never paid for any of this shit. And what's cool about, the stuff that I've studied of him, he doesn't use his strangey language. No. He speaks English. Yeah. Whereas if you go to one of these seminars or you go to one of these, you find out later it is kind of a cult. They have all these little gadgety terms.
Yes.
It's like, the problem. You ever find yourself not being able to sleep at night? It's because you don't have the flibberty gibbet. Yeah. And if your flibberty gibbet was in tune, and most people don't even know they have a flibberty gibbet, but to get in touch with it, you've got to sign up for this class. Yes. And it's like $2,000 or whatever, and then the next one's $3,000. And that's the thing, like with the Scientologists, and I don't hate to beat up on them. But like they have the operating thetan program, right? Operating thetan 1 through now it's 10. It used to be 6. Now it's through 10. Mm-hmm. And an analogy I heard was, could you imagine going to a Catholic church and they said, okay, you got to pay for all these classes, and then at the 10th level, we're going to let you know that Jesus died for your sins. But the first class, we don't tell you that yet, and then the second class, we don't tell you. It's not until you get to the 10th level that we tell you, oh yeah, hey, by the way. Here's the final punchline of salvation. Jesus died for your sins. He's like, the church wouldn't survive if they did that. It's got to be, it's got to be more ecumenical, if you will, message, right?
Right. And another thing, Abe, about the language is usually, the message of the cult in terms of its belief system is very dualistic. Everything is narrowed into the good guys and the bad guys.
Right.
And so they're trying, and what they try to do is they narrow the language so that it conforms to this either or mentality. Because naturally, if you can narrow people's thinking to either this or either that, you're much more easily controllable. So the vocabulary that they're teaching people that you're describing is a bunch of like loaded language, which are virtue and vice words. So they'll give you a bunch of new words that are still, like good guy words. And then there's like the evil word, that these are the words that if you don't do what they want, that's what they call you. So for example, let me just give you, see?
Yeah, that's a great crystallization, but continue, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let me just give one other example. Like we've been talking about spiritual cults, but there are also political cults and there are psychological cults. So a couple of left-wing groups that I would definitely consider cults, they have their own virtue and vice words, just like the political cults do. So you're probably familiar with this. So if you're a socialist or if you're like a true communist, the last thing you want to be called is something like a bourgeois individualist, right, or a petty bourgeois, blah, blah, blah. And the idea is that if you see these words being used on other people and you see the effect it has on them, that this is a word we call our enemies. And if we start calling our own people in here enemies, or our own people these names, psychologically, we can really hurt them. And they do. And so the more you use this terminology, the last thing you want to do is be called this name. And so it's like a sin name. And that's a good way to control people.
Well, see, and to your point, though, you and I think we run in at least the same circles online. I have a reaction when people call me comrade, right? So, and they'll send me an email, hey, comrade. Like, they're being nice to me. I get it. It's what you said, a virtue word.
Yes.
But I resent it because it's that strangey language.
Yes.
Right? It's like, oh, you're not in our circle, and I don't have a circle. Yeah, yeah. I don't do this shit. I came up religious. I got early release for time served. Okay, so I cringe at words like that. I mean, like, because when I was a born again when I was a kid, till about almost the end of college, almost became a minister. That's my little background, and so we had all that language. Well, hey, if you're having a problem, well, hey brother, are you in the Word?
Yeah.
Outside looking in, that sounds fucking weird.
Yeah.
What do you mean in the Word? Like what word? Like if you don't know what that means,
right?
It means reading the Bible. But if you don't know that, it sounds bizarre. Or if you say something that sounds secular, well, that's of the world, brother. That's of the world. That kind of shit they say all the time. So even though the guy means it, it's a virtue word, like you said. When I hear comrade, I cringe. I get like, because I'm like, no. I don't want to start buying into all that happy horse. I want an ecumenical solution to all these problems that we have. I don't want to hear about bourgeoisie. That's just where I go.
Yeah. And I think, one of the thing is, in reading things about what happens to people when they get out, they have a lot of work to do. And one of the things they have to do is they have to reorganize their vocabulary, because their vocabulary has been so narrowed by the cult that when they leave, they don't have the breadth of words that they once had to describe what's really going on. So they're using a vocabulary from a very narrow world on a way more complex world, and it doesn't work. And people don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And so they have to like relearn their old vocabulary, because the one they had in the cult is no longer applicable.
Right. And that's the thing is when you leave, when I left the church, it was pretty abrupt when I left. Yeah, and I had friends. It wasn't like I didn't have friends. I was just going to church. It wasn't like I was, in a camp in Guyana somewhere.
Right.
But I literally let go of a lot of people because they couldn't handle my bad influence now. Because I was, and it wasn't like a secret. I had spent a few years getting, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But I can only imagine when you're entire, like you said, the lieutenants, those guys have a livelihood.
Right.
And a lot of them, and especially in the more established groups, make a lot of money.
That's right.
The Scientology guys, if you're like running a thing or a center or something in a region, you're like a director of Doodah, or you're running that goddamn Navy they have. I mean, you make a lot of money. If you have a come to Jesus moment, no pun intended, you're fucked. Especially a lot of these guys, they get them right out of high school.
Yep.
There's nothing else. They got no other skill set or training. They can organize, maybe join a union if those ever make a comeback. But like, so, we got a few minutes left here. So, when someone's like walking down the street, and this was in LA all the time, they'd always have a hot chick in front of the Scientology Center. I notice here in Austin, we got one giant Scientology Center, but it's by the cemetery. So it's not a lot of foot traffic. Like you drive by, you see the sign, and there's this big giant parking lot, and they have this like big horseshoe complex. Looks like an old ranch or something. But it's not like a lot of foot traffic. Whereas in LA, they got them on Sunset Boulevard, they got them on Santa Monica Boulevard, and there was always some like really attractive chick, not too sexy but dressed pretty cute. Yeah, and she's handing out tracts or whatever, or they try to get you in on their psychotropic drugs museum display. I got roped into one of those one time. I didn't know Scientology until I got the end of the museum. In air quotes. I didn't know. It's just, they showed the front had these windows of like Phineas Gage and, train spikes going through your forehead and, talking about, Prozac and all. And so I'd rather give people acid than that shit. So I walked right in and I'm going through this museum. I'm like amazed. And then I get to the end and it turns out it was a Scientology deal.
Yes.
And I was pretty pissed off because I'm like, okay, so now you try to find a commonality.
Yes.
And this is supposed to be the answer. My answer is to get clear. All right. I just need to take your fucking OT classes and everything's great.
Right.
So like,
in Berkeley, where I saw this, I think I mentioned it in the article. At the university, there's a long stretch once you enter the university, and on either side, it's kind of a walkway that goes all the way from the north side to from the south, the south side to the north side of the campus. And it's I would say it's about a mile walk across the whole campus. But on either side of this walkway, there are all these other student organizations. There are all these student organizations,
right.
You know, for the Palestinians, this or that. They found a way to come up with front groups that are just simply one of the groups aligned along the way of the college. And they're the ones that have, you know, they have their table. And just as you said, the people that are at the table are usually attractive. They're also good social psychologists, and they read people. They don't go after people in groups. They look for single individuals, and they watch their body language. And if somebody's walking slow, they look a little depressed or something like that, they come after them and they try to bring them in. So I know that you know, usually I think universities are another place where they'll go because they do want people that are smart, but they want to make sure that they're vulnerable. And, you know, a university is a place where people are in transition. And so they want to go after people when they're in transition.
Right. Well, man, listen, we're about out of time, but I know we're going to continue our conversation, but and then also I'm going to have the link to your article in the body of the show. But let's catch up next time. And, you know, I really appreciate having you on and, you know, sharing your wisdom, because it is hard fought and hard won.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Hey guys, my guest has been Professor Bruce Lerro, and we're going to have a part 2 to this pretty soon. But for right now, you can catch this episode on thebittertruth.info. And probably releasing more blogs as we go. The site's barely a week or 2 old now, and we're just kind of getting it going. But you can also listen to us on Spotify and iTunes and everything else that you listen to podcasts for, free of charge, because we want this info out there. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.